What we're talking about today, we're in a series called Family Matters, and if you're new to our church, we've been spending the last 2 weeks talking about like family stuff and kind of how do we unpack that. But today's kind of a big one, and the reason that today's a big one isn't because the topic necessarily is so big, but part of the reason that today's such an important one is because it's so tethered to so many emotions that many of us have, because we're going to be talking about estrangement when it comes to families. And if you're here and you're like, you know what, I don't have any family tension or anything like that, and me and my parents, we just hug all the time. That's all it is. We don't ever like get in a fight or anything like that. That's fantastic. Let's just assume this is for all of your friends, because everybody else probably happens a little bit. And then I would say this: if you're here and immediately when you knew what we were talking about, maybe you forgot that was this Sunday and you showed up anyway, and you kind of regret that you're here now, and you don't want to leave right this minute, but you're gonna give it about 10 minutes before you sneak off to the bathroom. So I'd say this: if you get into this and you bring some pain to this, right, which is most of us, first off, I'm glad you're here. And secondly, I would say this: this isn't going to be exhaustive. And so the caveat to this is we're going to open sort of a can of worms. I'm going to talk about my experience with it a little bit, and then we're going to reference a couple people that I think are incredibly helpful on this, that are either psychologists or therapists that I think are great. And so we're going to do that. Now, to get us all caught up, what we said for the last couple of weeks is week one, we said that the stewardship of your role in your family, right? The stewardship of your role in your family, it matters to God. And the story that you tell in those relationships later on, it's being written right now. So the whole first sort of sermon that we did on this is that you have a role to play in your family, whether that's mother or father or brother or sister, grandparent. We said, we had all of these sort of names. You play a role and matter significantly to God. And then last week, week two, what we said was that Jesus, right, never lowers the standard when it comes to how we operate or interact with people. He never lowers the standard. And then we said this: he never stops extending grace. And so we said this: there's a tension throughout Christianity, especially where you almost kind of bend one way or the other. It's like we're primarily grace people, we're primarily truth people. And when it comes to family, you know this, you really can't just choose one. You have to embody both, right? So there's boundary setting, but there's also like love within the boundaries. We talked about all that. So that was last week. So I put in my notes to this. Today is one of the more complex weeks of the series. We're going to talk about what happens when family distance becomes real, when the gap has become a canyon in a lot of ways, when the relationship that was supposed to be or feel permanent has become something that oftentimes we'll talk about almost in the past tense, right? Now, this kind of creeps into some of your conversations, that sort of thing. When you talk about the relationship that you used to have with a mom or a dad or a sibling or somebody like that, right? All of a sudden it's in the past tense. Or, and this is going to be, I think, the person I'm as much or more concerned about today that we're talking to, is when you're not fully there yet, but you're heading there, and you may not even realize that you're heading towards that kind of distance, right? And sometimes it feels like it sneaks up on you. So the word that's been used for a long time to describe this, that's become more, I think, popular, famous now, is called estrangement. Now, most of us grew up believing that family estrangement was something that happened in other families, especially if you were younger and things were good, right? Something that happens to other families. We can say this together. This happens to dramatic families, and you've seen this. You ever been around somebody else's family, and you're like, it's just all drama, right? You go there, and and you enjoy listening about it, but you don't enjoy experiencing it, right? So you get the dramatic families, dysfunctional families, or families with oftentimes real abuse or serious problems. It feels like this kind of becomes a part of their story. But for many people, and I think this, especially in suburbia, right? Life happens to you along the way, and as life happens to you, all of a sudden, you look at your own family, even if you wouldn't have described it in those ways, and begin to experience some sort of estrangement now. And so now you're in your 30s, maybe you're in your 40s, or in your 50s. You got your own life, you got your own marriage, probably got your own kids, and then for a long time, you didn't call this estrangement. What you called it is being busy, but you planned to be busy more and more as you went forward. Like you planned to not spend as much time with your family. You actually started planning to miss certain holidays. And you didn't say this, you didn't even have a big conversation about it, you just happen to be busy, right? Sometimes you start naming it, and you might say something like, I need space, or oftentimes in our culture now, we'll talk about this more, you start saying, I need boundaries, and I'm all about boundaries, but also you can manipulate boundaries to mean so many different things to your benefit or whatever you want it to do. You call it a boundary. Some of you just said this, you're like, I'm just not going to go over there as much, all right? But over time, something started to become clear, and the distance wasn't accidental. The distance that you begin to experience was normal, right? So if you're in your 30s or 40s, maybe in your 20s, you look out when it comes to a sibling, a family member, a grandparent. You go, this is actually our normal life now. And it didn't happen because of one conversation. In fact, it was all of the little conversations that often never repaired the relationship over the years. It was the comment at Thanksgiving that felt small to everyone else but landed somewhere deep in your heart. It was the way a parent dismissed your feelings, then acted confused when you pulled away. The way that every hard conversation somehow turned into you being too sensitive, too dramatic, too ungrateful, too hard to please. And then you started talking about it when you got older and got more confident. You started talking about it with your friends. Maybe you talked about it with your spouse. Maybe you talked about it with a therapist. Maybe, and this is always interesting now, through a podcast or somebody that you respect on social media. And they started giving language to something that you had felt for years, but you never knew it had a name. And all of these things started bubbling up inside of you, and now you had a way to talk about something that you felt. And what's fascinating about all of those things, and I can say this with relative confidence, and that's this. Most of the people that you talked to about whatever the distance was affirmed your side of the story primarily. Like every podcaster, you know this, they want you to come back and listen. Now, a lot of these are helpful. I love podcasters. We're about to reference several of them, right? But also, your clicks help fund that, right? Which means there's a little bit of drawing this back, and if you're constantly offended, some of those things just, it's not always helpful. Your friends, maybe there's a handful, but most of our friends, when you tell them the story of your pain, come to care for you, not necessarily to make you a better person. And that's a different thing, right? And so you look at all of this, and you start going like, hey, I'm getting all of these people that are affirming the things that I'm feeling, right? And so then you go from there, and then here's what happens. Along the way, right, you start to believe that this relationship cannot be repaired anymore, or cannot be repaired to the point that it was before all of this began to happen. And it's not because you wanted that to be true most of the time, but because every attempt to talk about it seemed to make it worse, right? And this is kind of the sobering fact. And if you talk to people, and we'll talk about this in a second, talk to parents in particular, they will say this too. Every time I talk about it, it just gets worse. I don't know how to do it. If you ever had a teenager, that's called freshman year. You know what I'm saying? Like that's what every time we talk about it, it just seems to get worse, right? You tried to explain the pain, and maybe your family or somebody else, they heard accusation when you explained it. You tried to name a pattern, and what they felt was disrespect. You tried to describe what it felt like to be their child, and they heard you rewriting the whole story of your family, right? And then there's the other side of this. And the other side of it doesn't get talked about a ton. And I think it's also fascinating to hear. And so if you're in your 30s, 40s, 50s, like I am, 20s, and you feel some of this, I want you to hear the other side of this too, because I think it's very important. The other side would say this, right? The other side is the parent, and they're experiencing something completely different than you experienced, right? They hear their adult child describing their childhood, and it feels like their entire life is being put on trial. Every decision that they made, every weakness that they had, every moment they failed, every limitation they carried, don't miss this. This is important for you to hear if you're my age, is now all evidence of the distance. Every mistake they made is all now evidence of what this distance is. And in their mind, they're going, wait, was I perfect? I was not perfect, right? Did I love you? Most parents would say yes. Did I try? Most of them tried. Did I sacrifice? Most parents sacrificed. Did I show up the best way I knew? Most of them would say, I think I did. But every conversation, often for the parent or the estranged sibling or somebody like that, it feels like a courtroom for them. Nothing they say is quite right. If they apologize, it's not specific enough. I wrote that one very specifically because I was very good at going, that's a broad apology. She's like, I apologize for the literal words I said. Do you know what I mean? Like there's a little bit of that, right? It's not specific enough. If they explain it, they're all of a sudden being defensive. If they say that's not what I meant, they're minimizing. If they say I don't remember it that way, they're gaslighting, even though most people can't even define it. Anyway, so they're gaslighting. If they say nothing, they're avoiding. If they feel trapped, right? They feel trapped in these conversations because they know that they've got things wrong. But they also feel like they're being asked to confess to a version of the story that they don't believe is completely true. I'll read that one more time, right? They would say that they got some things wrong, but they also feel like they're being asked to confess to a version of a story of the family history that they don't believe is completely true. And then you find yourself, and we'll talk about this guy in a minute, there's somebody, his name is Matthias Barker, who's phenomenal. I'll give you a little bit more details. But he calls this like you're at a stalemate. Like now all of a sudden you can't move. Then all of a sudden it feels like a courtroom, and there's evidence, and then there's distance, and and what happens with families, especially in their 20s, 30s, and 40s in particular, is now it's like we don't know what to do next, and so it's just awkward, or it's just weird, or we just don't come over anymore, right? The adult child wants acknowledgement for the things that have happened, but the parent hears, and listen, the parent hears, I want you to admit that you were the villain in my own story. And the parent just wants grace. The child hears, you're ignoring the damage. And then everybody freezes, nobody wins, and everybody's in pain. Now, both people feel wounded. Both people feel misunderstood. Both people believe the other person is missing something important. And both people are waiting for the other person to finally see it. And that's called family, right? Now, I want to say this out of the gate. Now, what we're going to talk about, that was the intro. So thanks for coming. Here's this. If I described any of this for you, and I think most of us have some version of this, right? There's an easy part of this, and this is what I would do if I were you. So the next few minutes to go, that's easy for a pastor guy to say, but he doesn't really know. And so I talked to my mom about this. I was like, can I talk about this? She gave me permission a few years ago to do it. My family's, me and my mom grew up, she's a phenomenal mother, phenomenal. We were opposite ends of the personality spectrum, literal opposite ends of the personality spectrum. And we had a significant part, probably in my mid-20s on into like early 30s, where we were trying to figure out how to work on it, right? And here's what she did, and I think this is a really important thing for her that she did so well. We were on a drive together. We were driving back somewhere, just me and her. And we're going through the mountains of somewhere, I don't remember where it was. And she, out of nowhere, just said this. She says, I want our relationship to be great. And I don't know how to do that with all the things that you're demanding. And I went, you're right. It's your fault. No, I didn't say it. But I was like, yeah. And she said this. And I thought this was so great. She goes, I want you to help me figure out how we can do this. And this is what she said. Figure out how to do this together. And overnight, I'll tell you this, overnight, it did not get better. In fact, it got worse before it got better. But because we kept coming to the table, right, we were able to figure a lot of this stuff out and make inroads. And so I would say over the last 5 or 6 years, I've been fascinated because I have so many friends, I have so many people that I know that are in some version of this, or headed there, and maybe they don't even know it, or there's like a tension or whatever, and sometimes it's passive aggressive, or they just don't say it, but there's all the versions of this, and so we've been trying to figure out how to talk about this. And so I would say today what I'm going to do is a lot of this comes from personal experience, and then a lot of it we're going to pull from people that I think are just brilliant on these sort of things, right? So what I just explained is what I would say is this is how unrepaired hurt works in families consistently. It never just wounds one person. It almost always creates two sides of those stories. And both stories, I'm going to say this, feel completely true to the person that's telling them and feeling them. The adult child says this, you won't acknowledge what happened. The parents say, nothing I say is enough. Adult child says, you keep defending yourself. Parent says, you keep accusing me. Adult child says, I need distance to be healthy. Parent says, you're punishing me with silence. And over time, the distance feels inevitable. And repair feels impossible. And here's kind of the phrase that I want you to start with today, and that's this. Because both sides of this tension are calculating fault in the other person. All right, let me just say this. Can I say this? Calculating fault is an important part of any relationship, right? You got to be able to name whatever it is that bothered you. But this is also a cycle that will keep you in unrepaired hurt. If you don't at some point go, well, I think I've clearly articulated what the problem is on my side, right? And I'll just tell you this, right? That's typically not a 5-year process. You usually know pretty quick what's going on. Both sides are calculating fault, right? This is where so many people, and what I want to figure out is how do we do it. So during the pandemic, I ran across phenomenal, his name is, he's a psychotherapist, and he'd post these videos. If you've never heard of him before, you should look him up. His name is Matthias Barker. Anybody know Matthias Barker? You guys watch him? All right, he's phenomenal. I love him. He's a follower of Jesus, but brilliant mind. Studied with the Gottman Institute, and he specifically talks about estrangement. In fact, I would tell you to do this because some of this content is going to come directly from him. You should go to estrangement.com and just Go through all of his stuff. He's great. And if anything, you're like, man, that sounded good. It's probably Matthias or Gottman Institute or other people that I've read. But he talks about this. He's fascinating because he does TikToks that are interesting. But then what he does is he actually will take stories from families on a live show, which is interesting, and just talk about it. It's a really beautiful thing. So estrangement.com, or you can find him at matthiasjbarker.com. Super helpful. And so one of the ideas that he mentions, and he talks about a lot, and he says this: estrangement rarely ever announces itself, but it always accumulates over time. Right? It always accumulates over time. 26% of adults, this is fascinating, have completely cut off contact with one or more parents. It says again, 20% or 26%. So, a quarter of adults have cut off contact with a parent. 1 in 2 people are estranged from a sibling. That's fascinating to me because I'm an only child. Now I've watched my kids and I go, I get it. But I'm just saying, like, when you watch other siblings, you go like, all right, think about it. 1 in 2 people are estranged from a sibling. And in surveys, let me say this, church community, the numbers are actually higher than a general population, right? In most church communities, it's actually higher on all the statistics. And almost none of it started with a catastrophic moment. Now, there are things, let me just, again, I feel like I should caveat, I think you already know this. We're not talking about like abusive sort of things. We're certainly not talking about like sexual abuse. We're not talking, get out. We're not asking you to invite that back in, right? That's a whole different thing. But I'd say for most families where that's not what we're talking about, right, we're going, hey, it's not a catastrophic moment, right? It started with small moments that never got repaired over time. And here's what I've learned about family distance. It's this: it rarely announces itself. It almost always accumulates until one day the relationship that was supposed to be the most permanent thing in your life becomes one of the most complicated areas of your life. And the church, right, are guys like me that wear like the Britney Spears mic and get up and they talk about it, talk about the Bible, right? The church gives you typically 2 things, right? Forgive them and move on, or set a boundary and protect your peace. Those are the 2. Right? Forgive them and move on, set a boundary and protect your peace. And both of those things contain truth. Neither of them, notice this, is specific enough to actually help long term, even if they may feel good in the short term. What's true is that every family has conflict. Conflict is not the enemy. Conflict is normal. Conflict is inevitable. And it's actually healthy, notice this, when it gets addressed. But unrepaired hurt will lead you, right, into a place where you're in like a pattern cycle you can get out of. Right? Small moment that happened that never got acknowledged, the pattern that repeated itself, never got named, the wound that was real and was met with avoidance and blame instead of curiosity and repair. Unrepaired hurt is what accumulates. Unrepaired hurt is what creates the drift. Unrepaired hurt is what eventually becomes the uncrossable canyon that we're not sure how to fully interact with. Right? Barker's research said this, that the biggest predictor of estrangement isn't the severity of the wound, it's how often repair happens in the relationship. And I think it's important, especially for those of you who might be parents in the room, who have kids that you feel this with. The answer from the 20, 30, 40-something-year-old is almost always about how often repair happens, no matter how severe the thing was, right? You say it another way, it's not what happened, it's what happened after what happened, right? Families that repair, even imperfectly, even incompletely, stay connected to each other. And families that don't repair, even from relatively minor wounds, tend to drift towards some version of estrangement, which means this, and I'm going to miss this. The estrangement happening right now with us is often not catastrophic, even if it feels like something might have happened later on. It's a result of the small moments that never got addressed, accumulated, until the distance becomes the default way of interacting in a relationship. And for the parents of adult kids that are experiencing estrangements, most adult kids don't respond specifically to a moment. They respond to patterns. You can't repair a pattern that you haven't acknowledged and you haven't fixed. So what we're going to do is, and I'll do this, we're going to look at a couple of passages in the New Testament that talk about this. Before we read, I almost like put you in the story here. This is Jesus teaching, and the teaching that Jesus has, if you've never read it, many of you have, the Sermon on the Mount, a lot of people have like cherry-picked versions of it. So actually one of my challenges to you this week is I'd actually love for you, it takes you about 12 to 15 minutes. I want you to sit down this week and read the entirety of the Sermon on the Mount. 12 to 15 minutes, do it while you're drinking coffee, right? And so Jesus is teaching this, right? It's early in his public ministry. He hasn't been at this part of it very long. Word is spreading about him as a rabbi in Galilee, doing things that nobody has seen before. He's healing people. He's teaching with authority. Not like the other teachers who had quoted sort of everything that came before them. He speaks, and notice this, with his own material, with his own commentary on these words that have been sort of drifting, right? So the crowds start coming, and then one of the writers, one of his followers named Matthew, tells us that a group of people had come from Galilee, from Jerusalem, Judea, regions all across the Jordan, people traveling days to hear him speak. And what he does is he speaks to this crowd, and there was all of these people who many of them were just ordinary people, desperate people, sick people, curious people, religious people, all these people that are there. And he starts to do something fascinating. He sits down to talk to them, right? Which is this cue that he's about to teach and sort of whatever his rabbi is. Now, I kind of laugh. I always sort of, sorry, I'm a geek, I shouldn't say. I think it's always like, you know when your dads have like a dad voice? Do you know what I'm talking about? Like, I almost kind of laugh. I wonder if Jesus had like a teaching voice. Like when he went to sit down, he pulls up whatever that skirt thing is, and he sits down, he's like, and now we go. You know, like I don't know what that was, but that's just in my mind, that's what he's doing. He said, now all these ordinary people, he's about to teach them on the Sermon on the Mount. He's about to teach them that nobody in that crowd had heard this way. What he does is he takes the law or these ancient commands that had lived for a long time within Jewish culture, and he does not replace them. He does not dismiss them. He actually takes them further, right? He would say things like this. You've heard it say, don't murder. I say, don't harbor anger towards your brother, right? You've heard it said, don't commit adultery. I say, don't even look with lust. We talked about this last week. You've heard it said, love your neighbor, but I say, love your enemy. And over, he raises a standard to a place that no one in the crowd could reach, and everyone listening knows it. The religious leaders who spent their lives keeping the rules, they can feel the ground shifting under them. The ordinary people who had always assumed the law was for someone else, they're realizing that what Jesus is teaching is aimed directly at them. And all of a sudden, he teaches in a way that's incredibly demanding of this group of people, right? And what he does is he teaches on the altar, right? And he teaches on the altar, and what he's going to do in Matthew chapter 5, verses 21, is he's going to teach about the place that they would come to sacrifice to be good with God, right? It was a place where the relational gap got addressed in these moments. And so what he does is he's going to reference anger, and he's going to reference murder, and then he's going to talk about the altar and what happens to a person when they're there. Matthew chapter 5, verse 21, it says this. It says, you've heard it said to people long ago, you shall not murder, which I think most of us agree with. And anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But he says this, but I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to a brother or sister, raka, which again is this idea answerable to court. Anyone who says you fool will be in danger of the fire of hell. And then he says this, and this is fun, and I don't know what his dad voice is, but I feel like he says it here. He says, therefore, if you're offering your gift at the altar to make you right with God, right? Therefore, if you are offering your gift at the altar, and there you remember your brother or sister has something against you, I want you to picture this. Leave your gift in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to them, and then come and offer your gift. Now, we're not sacrificing things at the altar, I hope. Don't come here if you do that. But I'll just say, like, we're not really doing that. You know, you're not doing that. But let me just say this, right? The image for this group of people, as Jesus is teaching this, is going, for me to be right with God, I take this to the altar. And Jesus going, and when you get in that moment and realize that canyon or distance exists, drop it and leave and make that right before you come here. Now, before I make all observations about this text, it's fun. I'd say, like, if you're here and you're a follower of Jesus, my gut says this has probably come up for you at some point. If you've been around church for a while, I always kind of laugh about this, but I think about, like, we have these really beautiful and deeply experiential worship moments. If you've ever been in a fight with your wife while you're trying to experience a worship moment, do you know what I'm talking about? Anybody else ever done that? Just the pastor. Great. Fantastic. But you're standing there and you're trying to sing whatever this song is together. It's just like, we're not right. We're fighting about orange juice or something on the way in. You know what I mean? Like, we're having and you feel the distance immediately. Can you know this? It just feels weird to go, you know? Or, now here's even worse. You ready? Again, you're a better person than me, so I think this. You look at them and they do that, and you're like, for real? You know what I mean? Like, anybody, you know what I'm talking about? Like, you serious right now? Like, or you do this, right? You've probably experienced this too. This is always fun. Like, I talk to people like, I'm trying to spend time with God or have a quiet time or those kinds of things. You're reading scripture, like absorbing it. And the only thing you can think about is how pissed off you are at somebody else. You know what I'm talking about? Like, you're just angry. And you're reading whatever this, like, psalm is. And you're, like, midway through it. And it's all this emotion. And you're going, I don't know. You're not getting anything out of it, right? And all of a sudden, and I think this is what's fascinating, a face appears, a hurt from somebody else bubbles up, the emotion of anger comes to your mind, conversation that you're avoiding finds you in those moments. The distance you're telling yourself is fine suddenly doesn't feel like it's fine. And here's what's interesting. On all of these things, you know exactly what it is as soon as it comes up. You know exactly who it is. And somewhere underneath the worship, the quiet moments, all that, you feel the weight of it. And here's what we do, or at least I do. You push it back down so that you don't have to address it now. And this is the moment that Jesus is teaching it about. Before you come and make everything right between you and God, here's all my sins, I'm sacrificing to be right, before you do all that, right? You make it right with the person. He didn't have to tie this to the altar, right? He could have just said, go reconcile with people. But he specifically places this teaching in the moment of encounter with God because moments of spiritual openness is precisely when the unrepaired relationship tends to become the most impossible to ignore. It is very hard to be in the presence of God or the awareness of his presence wherever you are and also carry with you all of this other stuff into it and be good. Person in Matthew 5 didn't go to the altar thinking about estrangement. They went looking for God, and in the process of looking for God, God surfaced attention in the relationship. And Jesus doesn't say if you have something against your brother. And I think it's fascinating. He says if your brother has something against you, meaning this, that if you know that out there that exists, right, then it is to you as you become aware of it to go and fix it. So Jesus is not going, spend the next 10 minutes calculating all the damage that they did. He's not even assigning fault, which I think is fascinating in this. He's not even saying the person who was the most wrong should go and apologize first. And again, this is always fascinating because that's who I prefer to do it. And it's almost always the other person. He's simply saying you stop calculating the fault. You start responding to the awareness that you already have. And whoever becomes aware becomes responsible for whatever the next step is. And this is the part that I think is hard and probably the most painful of the things that I'm going to say. When you become aware of the distance, it becomes your responsibility to think about what's next. It's not the guiltiest person. It's not the one who started it. It's not the one it's the one who is aware enough right now to feel the weight, the unrepaired distance. And here's the second observation, that's this. Matthew 5 always gives the person a choice, which I think is fascinating. As it's talked about, he has a choice. They can actually stay at the altar and push through. They can push the awareness down. They can tell themselves they're going to deal with it later. Whatever the worship thing is right there. The relationship is complicated. Later will eventually come, or they can obey. But they have a choice. And here's the thing that you know. You have a choice. Right? You have a choice in every bit of this, right? They can leave the gift, interrupt whatever feels sacred in that moment, walk away from the altar, and then go towards the person. But awareness of these things always creates a decision, and I believe that decision creates responsibility. And Jesus says, leave the gift. Go first, and then come back. Now, I'm going to say this real quick. Some of you hear that, and you're a little bit frustrated that I said it like this, and here's why you're frustrated. Because you've left before, and you went, and it didn't feel like it helped, and everything that I read for the first 8 minutes of the talk, you went, well, that's what we did. And then I came back, and then it didn't work. Like, there's still distance here, right? Right? Estrangement doesn't begin with conflict. It begins when repair stops. And here's what I would say. That says, repairing relationships and tension is never a one-time sort of thing. In the same way that people get into debt, right? You don't build these things that happen or experience these things with one decision most of the time, right? So what happens is as this gets talked about, reconciliation is something that bubbles up as something that deeply matters to God, but it's different, right? It's different than how we talk about it. So in Romans 5:10, I'm going to give you one more verse that we're going to look at. And And this is Paul writing to a group of people, talking about what Jesus did on their behalf. Here's what he says. He says, for if we were God's enemies, we were reconciled to him through the death of his son. He said, how much more then, having been reconciled, shall we be saved through his life? Not only is this so, but we also boast in God through our Lord Jesus Christ, through whom we have now received reconciliation. Now, I want to tell you why this is so important, specifically this. The direction that God goes is the pattern that I believe that we have to lead with our lives. God reconciles us to himself, not the other way around. We were the ones who created the distance, but the initiative came from the one with every right to withhold. I want to say this for all my Enneagram 8s like me, right? That never comes natural. I always want justice. I'm waiting for the phone call for years, right? I have a list when I see I know all of those things, right? But in these texts, the gospel message is that the initiative came from the one with every right to withhold. And let me just tell you this, right? If there's two stories in all of these, both of the stories tend to feel like they're the one who is the most right. And at some point, somebody's got to go first. Somebody's got to go and begin the reconciliation process. God just doesn't command the reconciliation thing. He practices it for us. God does the thing that he's asking us to do. He refuses to normalize unrepaired distance. And Jesus came into the world to solve that. That's why he sent Jesus. That's why he interrupts worship in the ways that it's talked about. It almost feels like in this moment that God left the gift at infinite cost towards the people who had moved away from him, and he is asking you to do the same thing, I believe, with the people that he's put in your life. Now, I want to talk about this practically for a second because I know there's a lot. Right? Now, I said all of this to say, in some ways, if you have a parent or a family member that you feel stuck with, right, I'm going to give you a bunch of practical stuff for a minute, and then I'm going to tell you this. There is a limitation to everything that I'm about to say. So everything I'm about to say is, I think, helpful. At least it's been helpful for me. And there is a limitation, and the limitation where it stops is where I'm going to come back here at the end and tell you where it sort of falls short, and I think what you do on the other side of it, right? But on the practicality, I would say this. Not every relationship can be restored to what it was. Not every relationship should have the same level of access. Reconciliation and trust are not the same thing. Reconciliation requires one willing person to move forward, right? And Jesus is not asking you, and I said this earlier, to return to an unsafe space. It's not that. But what Jesus is asking, I think, is more of an interior thing for your heart that actually can repair these relationships, right? So I want to talk to the adult kids in the room who are like me, specifically when it comes to parents or siblings or these sorts of things, right? The adult kids, I would say this. You don't have to have the full reconciliation conversation all at once. But every person that wants freedom from it, I think, should do at least one step on a consistent basis. And that's this. All right, part of this comes from Matthias Barker, for sure. He says this. You work towards sending a message, right? Not to relitigate everything and not to make them understand the full scope of the wound, but you send a message to open the door, right? Something like this, right? I've been thinking about us. I don't want this distance to become permanent. I'd like to find a way to talk when you're ready. Like, give them an open door to that, right? That's it. It's a porch light sort of moment. Like, you're not turning off the light. You're not letting them off the hook. You're not pretending that nothing happened. You're leaving the door open that could have easily stayed closed. One of the quotes that I love by Barker, he says this. He says, you don't know what's happened in the years that you haven't spoken or the time frame that you haven't spoken. You don't know who they're becoming. People change, not always, but sometimes. And the only way to find out is to keep the door cracked. Right? I think one of the best steps that you could take is to send that message, to crack the door open, right? I'd also say this, if you're the one who's 30, 40, 20, 50, whatever, especially if it's a parent, I'll say this well, you will just be glad that you did. Whatever happens on the other side of it, you will be glad that you did. Now for the parent, I'll say this. I am not at that stage yet, but my mom was, and so I asked her, I was like, what would you say, right? So here's what she said, ask yourself, what's the kernel of truth in what my child is trying to tell me? She said, not the whole bushel, what's the kernel? What's the one thing they're pointing to that I haven't been willing to look at directly in my own parenting? Now, I'm not a parent who's parented all the way through yet, but I would also go, thinking about our own journey for the last 10 years with Henry and Eleanor and Oliver, I don't think I'd want to answer that question now. I can't imagine doing it 20 years in. I get emotional about this one. I'd say that the humility to go first in that and to do that well and to ask that before a conversation, it just goes so far. You write it down, you say it out loud. Then what I would encourage you to do is this. You take it to God before you take it to them. And you ask God, what is this? Right? And when you reach out, and this is, I'm just telling you from my perspective, and I think people that are probably my age, I think you lead with that. I don't think you lead with hurt. I don't think you lead with like all of your confusion around why they pulled back. I don't think you lead with what you sacrificed. Transparently, I don't know that they're going to see it even if you led with it. I think you lead with that kind of humility. And I want to say this, because this is the truth, right? That's a loss for you. And that will feel like a loss for you. You do not feel like you're coming from this massive position of strength. But whatever that courtroom thing is that you could usher them into, I'm just telling you this, and you know this, right? It's just not helpful, right? So here's a line, right? I stole this from Matthias thing. Lead with, I've been doing some thinking about all this. I think there are things that I haven't fully acknowledged. And here's the line, you ready? This is the line. Here's the gold sort of nugget. But I would like to try. I would like to try. You're not confessing everything or anything. You're not talking about all the blame. You're just showing enough curiosity that cracks that door open. And when you come to the table with like this different substance of what these conversations are going to be, I do think oftentimes you'll get a different reaction over time. All right? All right. I'm going to give you 4 practical things for everybody, and then I'm going to tell you the secret sauce. First one is this. I think you got to notice whatever the cycle is. Every strange relationship has a cycle. It's continual, a pattern of action and reaction that both people are participating in. And before you reach out, identify what part of the cycle is yours, not theirs. All right? What part of this cycle are you doing? All right, 20, 30, 40-year-old people, right? All my people, you ready? Here we go. You have a part in the cycle. And a lot of it, at least for me and the people that I talk to, is a version of arrogance. So stop it. Stop it. Here's why. You ready? Most of us haven't parented to that point yet. And you just don't know what you don't know. And for all the failure stuff and all the things you're probably right about, you don't know. You don't know. And if you don't know, and you're not curious, then you will only set it up to fail, right? For those of you who are parents, I'll just tell you this. I do think this most of the time. That when a child or an adult child or even like a sibling comes to you, by the time they muster up whatever it is to come to you, right? However poorly they come to you, they still came. And it will almost never look like humility. But 9 layers through it, I do believe this. There is a child who is hurt, who is looking for a parent to see them. Right? Second thing is this. I think you got to heal the wounds that you have. It's hard to have conversations well from inside of a wound. Not because you have to be fully healed first, but it's an impossible standard for the other person if you haven't looked at trying to heal those kinds of hurts that you've had. I talked about this briefly already. You got to own your part. I think you lead with that. You don't have to own all of it, not more than is true, but you need to own something to come to it, and most of the time there's something that we can own, right? So one of the things that you can do is say this, and again, seal this language. I haven't spoken up about how I really feel about this thing. I've let things go on farther than they should have, or far longer than they should have. This is where I'd like to start. Can we talk about this, right? The last one is this, and then I'm going to talk about for the secret sauce. This is. I know I said it earlier. I just want you to reach out. If I could convince everybody to reach out, that'd be my goal. And some of you go like, I'm not reaching out because there's a boundary set because I feel like I'm going to enter into more pain. And let me just say this, and I know I'm the minority on this. This is the only thing I really get emails about anymore. Is when I'll say some version of culturally what is told to you is protection and emotional health, which is very true, all of these sorts of things, and the boundaries, and don't let other people hurt you, all that kind of stuff. I'm just saying, like, living your life fully when it comes to loving other people will mean that you will get to the end of your life a little bit bruised and bloodied, right? You cannot love other people sacrificially well and remain fully just whatever that is, you just don't, right? And so I would just say if the expectation is that you won't get hurt, right? It's not a real expectation if you want to have actual relationships with people, right? And so I'd say I'd love for you to go reach out imperfectly and completely, but reach out, right? Now, here's what I'm going to say. I'm going to stop reading. All right. Here's what I'm going to say. Let's end it. All of the stuff that you could do around this, and if you're not a follower of Jesus, it's going to feel odd. You can get practical stuff, and you should. You should get all the language to do this well, and you should. You get all of those things. And this is going to feel like the most preachery thing I could say, and I know that. But I'm right. And that's this. There are some things and pain and hurt that you have, and some canyons that feel like they can't be crossed. They will never be crossed outside of you getting on your knees and begging God to heal it. There's just some things that won't. Now, I'm never going to be the person that goes, so don't do the smart things that you know to do. And don't do the things practically that you should do. Like, don't go pray and then have a conversation with your dad and go, you suck. Like, that doesn't work. Like, I don't think God honors it. I don't think that's going to show up and be like, and then poof, it's all good. I don't think that's how it works. Be wise and be desperate for God to move. And I sit in a weird seat, and I know this, where I spend a lot of my time with people who have experienced pain or are experiencing pain in the middle of it. And I've been doing it just long enough now, almost 20 years, to say this. I have seen God heal relational wounds in families that felt insurmountable and that it was impossible, and God did. In fact, if you were to bring up something, my gut says at this point, I could go, yep, there's a story around that where God did that, and God healed things that even I was sitting there going, I don't know, man. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. But those battles aren't only won by your wisdom or your shrewdness or your brilliance. They are won in a private place where you find yourself saying, God, this is all I have. This is all I know. I'm going to do my absolute best. And would you heal what doesn't feel repairable? And then the other part is this, and this is the part that I think is interesting. I was wired and brought up to then go, okay, you know what I mean? Your turn. You go. Go, best friend, whatever that is, And that's not faith. The faith part goes, here is this. Here's all I have. God, would you move? And then the faith goes, and I believe, no matter what I see, that you will. Amen. And this is the part where I go, it's like, is that prosperity? I say, I don't think so, because it's all brokenness stuff. So it's not prosperity. But I believe that there's a faith component that God asks you. It's written. Faith is going beyond what you can currently see and believing God to do what only he can do. And the truth of the matter is this. I just believe this. Sometimes he does. And if it matters to you enough, you'll go, here's this, and I believe. Let me pray for us real quick. Father, we thank you so much for these truths. We thank you for the model of reconciliation that you gave us through the cross and the resurrection, moving our direction before we ever moved towards you. And we thank you for the way that you taught on the Sermon on the Mount that raises the standard so high. It doesn't really give us an out, but it gives us an enormous amount of grace. And it gives us something to aspire to with our lives. For the person in the room who's like low-key angry at the message, which is so great, I'm so glad. God, I pray that emotion would drive them to actually go further on it and deeper on it. For the person in the room who just feels more pain and hurt, and if they're really honest, kind of wishes they hadn't shown up today, right? Thank you for that too. God, I ask that you would move through that and that you would help them to find the help that they need. For the person in the room who's tried everything that we've talked about And when I said secrets, I was kind of just waiting to what that is. And then they were a little bit disappointed because they don't want to have to work for that kind of faith. And I pray this. I ask that you would move through their mind and their heart, and you would expand their faith and remind them that you are still the God who does miraculous things. And you are still the God who moves beyond us. I pray for the parent in the room, that everything we talked about today, it feels like maybe they've tried or they just can't figure out what to do, or it still feels like the courtroom thing. God, I pray that whenever and however they reach the end of that, I ask that you would help them to just never stop showing up. That they would make one commitment with the rest of their life. They're going to continue to come to the table and show up. I pray for everybody kind of like me. I ask that you would give us the wisdom. I pray that you would help us to have as much empathy as we can. I pray that you would help us to communicate well, have so much grace, and then at the same time, that you might use us to even initiate some of these conversations. That would bring healing and almost like a lifting of a weight when it comes to our families. God, we believe that you're the healer, not just of our minds, not just of our bodies, but that you heal relationships too. We just ask that you would do that. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.